First, though, our top story. Defence ministers from 17 countries have been meeting in the Danish capital Copenhagen, promising more military support for Ukraine to defeat Russia in a conflict approaching its sixth month. Earlier this week, the Pentagon pledged a further $1 billion worth of military assistance, but there are fears European enthusiasm for helping Ukraine might dwindle if Russia further limits gas supplies in the winter months. Meanwhile, there's growing clarity today over what caused spectacular explosions at a Russian naval base in Crimea. Arise News chief correspondent John Cookson has the story.
The direction of the war in Ukraine faces a vital few weeks, and Western defence ministers met knowing that if Russia can hold out until winter, some nations facing power cuts might reduce or withdraw their backing for Ukraine. President Zelensky, who addressed the meeting, knows that all too well.
And by essence, the same as employment by Russia of nuclear weapons. But
he fears war fatigue is setting in among Europeans facing rocketing fuel prices caused by the war, although host nation Denmark did the decent thing.
I hope that we here today can agree on even more contributions. And of course, Denmark is ready to do our part. Today, we can announce a new contribution of 110 million euro for weapons, equipment and training.
But perhaps Kyiv can take comfort that Britain, who supplied these armoured personnel carriers, pledged more rocket launch systems and missiles.
So I hope that all of us will be putting our hands in our pockets, seeing what we can deliver for Ukraine, and helping send a signal around the world that brutality doesn't win and the international community doesn't get tired. It stands up to its enduring values, no matter what.
The gathering comes 2 days after explosions rocked Russia's Saki naval base in the Crimea, destroying warplanes and exploding an ammunition dump. Yesterday, a Ukrainian government spokesman said Ukrainian special forces carried out the attack. Today, a confusingly different story for skeptical journalists.
The answer is very clear and short. I think that Russian military guys in this airbase ruined the very simply known rule: don't smoke in the danger places. That's it.
You think this is simply a Russian soldier smoking at an airbase that caused those massive big explosions?
I tell you that it's a very dangerous place. They have not to smoke there cigarettes.
So Ukrainian forces were not involved?
I answered to you. Thank you.
From this satellite image, Western military experts say 24 Russian warplanes were destroyed, although some appear intact. The Copenhagen summit presented a united front in favor of Ukraine. The question is, will that military support last through winter if Russia uses another weapon in its armory and begins cutting off European gas supplies? John Cookson, Arise News.
And John Cookson joins me now for more. Good to see you, John. Let's start with that European defence ministers meeting in Copenhagen that you were talking about in your package there. What did the meeting set out to achieve, and what did it achieve?
Hi Charles, good to see you. Well, this is the fourth in a series of meetings following an initial meeting at Ramstein some months ago, when 50 nations throughout the world pledged then to support Ukraine to the very end until it wins the war against Russia. Well, there's a lot of water run under the bridge since then. As I say, there have been several meetings, and at each one, more money, more military aid has been pledged to Ukraine. I'm hearing that a total of $1.5 billion was pledged today in Copenhagen. The Brits out front offering new rocket systems and missiles that have a range of 80 kilometers. The Danes, as I said in my story, putting their hands in their pockets to the tune of 100 million euros, a small amount, but a gesture nonetheless. The big question is, all these promises, will they actually come to fruition? And some nations, including for the likes of Germany, make these promises, but sometimes they're very, very slow in following through. So I think the Ukrainians can take comfort that on the surface at least, The Western nations showed a united front. They pledged to support Ukraine. But I have to say that these defense ministers are in a way in a world of their own. They're used to massive budgets, and they're talking about spending trillions of dollars sometimes. And they're not directly answerable to, for example, the British public, like a Prime Minister. Boris Johnson would be over the spiralling costs of fuel in the UK and in elsewhere in Europe. So, as I say, they sit a little bit remotely, but overall, I think Ukraine can take some comfort from the fact that Europe seems to be united for the time being. Might be a different story later this year as winter sets in.
And John, turning to events on the ground in Ukraine and territories around it, there appears to be growing clarity about the extent of the damage caused to that Russian airbase in Crimea, but what there isn't yet is any official claim of responsibility for the attack. What's the latest on all that?
Well, the story hasn't really moved too much today, except that as you saw in my report, the Ukrainian defense minister said it was because a Russian soldier dropped a cigarette, and that caused a chain of explosions. Well, you can believe that if you like, because the day before, Zelensky's office made it clear to journalists that it was an operation by Ukrainian special forces, and that to me makes more sense than a Russian dropping a cigarette. Although, having said that, the Russians said initially that it was an accident, but the devastation was clear to see there. I mean, it's not an airbase; it's a naval base for the Navy, and the aircraft belong to the Russian Navy, and we saw today the devastation. Although, as I said in my report, some jet fighters seem to have survived. We don't know what the casualties were on the ground, but one might hazard a guess that a number of Russian soldiers died.
And John, as the war grinds on month after month with no end in sight, what's the latest on the fighting across Ukraine?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, Charles, because there is intense fighting throughout the Donbass region and the area where the Donbass joins Ukraine proper, and images emerging tonight of Russians using and not seen before vacuum bombs. Now, these are terrifying weapons of war. They spray petroleum or aerosol into a vast area, and they explode, and they suck in all the air and take down a whole apartment block in one go. And there'll be images emerging a little bit later of them being used in the Donetsk region. So a grim development there for the Ukrainians, who are still fighting back on the front line, and you know, we are at a fairly crucial stage. They have to get, the Ukrainians that is, they have to regain as much territory as they can in this month, August, September, October, because beyond that, it's uncertain how much support they'll have from Europe and the US. And remember that Joe Biden, for example, his party facing defeat in the midterms in November, will he be a lame duck president after that? Will he be able to fulfill any commitments he's already made to Ukraine? And also the UK, there'll be a new Prime Minister from September the 5th. How certain will the new Prime Minister be, as Boris Johnson was, in supporting Ukraine? So difficult, uncertain times ahead for Ukraine and indeed that part of the world.
John, thank you ever so much. John Cookson, Arise Chief Correspondent, updating us there on the latest developments in and around Ukraine.